I'm Philip Nathan. I'm feels like a confessional here, doesn't it? I'm an immigration barrister, so I guess technically public law barrister as well. Perhaps I should introduce the other two as well.
My name is Beatrice Collier, and I'm a barrister at 5 Essex Court.
And my name is Justin Leslie, and I'm a pupil at 42 Bedford Row.
And I'm going to start, and I'm afraid it's Beatrice and I had notes which suggested we should say who we are and what we do and how we came to be who we are, which may be perhaps not so exciting as Justin, who didn't have the notes and is actually just going to tell you about public law. So we'll leave the real fruit to the end, which should, and you'll start with something rather dry. Anyway, I became an immigration barrister by a fairly circuitous route with a number of blind alleys. I started at school wanting to be a doctor, but fainted while dissecting a rat for A-level biology, which suggested a call for a change of direction. And truth be told, with science A-levels, there wasn't much option but to do a law degree. Now, I was called to the bar a horrifically long time ago in 1996, and I spent the next 4 years practicing crime not very well. Now, I think some of what I say about crime is fairly blinkered, but I may as well say it because it may be of interest to some. I was very young and idealistic at the time. I didn't go into crime because I enjoyed the theatre of it. I thought I could make a difference. And I found the criminal justice system a huge disappointment. I felt I was a small cog in a very big machine that was really recycling criminals, with really a few very brave and underfunded probation officers trying their best to make a difference and break the cycle. And I say all this, it's all rather sad because I say it when, as I understand it, things are no better now, and 15 years later the criminal justice system is falling apart as it's ever more underfunded. Perhaps I should have, even in my pupillage, realised that wasn't for me. I was sent by my clerks, and something that one does as a pupil, you get sent all sorts of strange things. I got sent by my clerks to Camberwell Green Magistrates Court for a Saturday morning first appearance on an armed robbery. I went on the bus down the Walworth Road, got to Camberwell Green Magistrate. While I was on the bus, my brand new mobile phone, which were quite unusual in those days, went off, and I had a call from a junior tenant who told me to pass on his regards to the detainee, and to tell him that to thank him for the last trial they'd done, which had paid for his new bathroom, and to tell him that him and his wife would be looking for kitchens that afternoon. It kind of tells you something I felt about that system, and sadly, as things stand now, with criminal legal aid as it is, he probably couldn't even buy a new phone, let alone a kitchen. Anyway, the thing that got me into public law was, I'm a son of a refugee, and I was always interested in refugee rights, and I left the bar in 2000. And again, I think that may be of interest, that you don't have to find your niche at the bar. You can find your niche outside and then get to the bar later, because I regard those first few years as a bit of, as I say, a dead end. But I joined a refugee charity as a caseworker in 2000, and later on ended up working for a solicitor's firm doing the same work. And again, one of the great things about, well, the solicitor's work was very enjoyable, but with public law, particularly immigration work, there's a lot of client contact, and for me that's what I really enjoy. And as a solicitor you get even more of that than you do at the bar. You also have other downsides of being a solicitor, which is why I found myself going back to the bar, and that is, you've got to be a successful solicitor, you've got to be intensely organised. and to administer a legal services commission contract, you've got to have the patience of a saint to get through the paperwork that the Legal Services Commission bombard you with, and the repeat applications to extend your contract every 3 or 4 years, plus audits. Frankly, I did not have the organisational skills to deal with that. And one of the great things, if you are disorganised, the bar forgives a lot with disorganisation. So I was very fortunate that I had, and again, this is hopefully something of use to know, is that if you've got a good solicitors firm behind you, you become very, very marketable with the bar. Solicitors are the prime source of our work. And so I had a very decent boss who realised that when I told her I didn't want to stay, really supported me in applying to chambers. And so in 2003 I went back to the bar and I worked as an immigration barrister, first at 36 Bedford Row, and I moved to Landmark Chambers in 2010. Now, and by doing so I found my area of work, I can safely say that. For me, I love it. Every time I meet a new immigration client, it's someone from somewhere else in the world. They've got a different story to tell. And generally speaking, again, I think one has to generalise to an extent. Within the criminal justice system, it was a very depressing client that one tended to meet. And in immigration, you hear some very depressing stories because, particularly in the asylum context, people have been through desperate ordeals. But equally, the sort of people that end up upping sticks and coming to another country tend to have a spark about them. So the clients that you meet in immigration are incredibly interesting. Now, as to the workload that we have, I think that there's a wonderful flexibility to the bar. Personally, I do all sorts of work. Although I'm in this very narrow niche, last night I had a look at my diary to see what I'd done in February, and I think it demonstrated, one, the flexibility of the bar, and also the variety of work that one can have even in a narrow field. And I was I worked it out, I was in the first tier tribunal 3 times, the upper tribunal once, 8 times in the administrative court, and once in the Court of Appeal. And that was within 3 weeks of the 4 weeks of February. And, the first tier tribunal, you're dealing with evidence, you're dealing with facts. The whole thing can suddenly change. As your client's giving evidence, being cross-examined, suddenly your whole case changes, and you've got to be quick on your feet and be able to adapt quickly to tailor your case accordingly. The Court of Appeal, you're quite often arguing a very narrow point of law, but with 3 judges firing questions at you. It goes without saying, I think, across the bar, that if you're going to be able to work on your feet, you've got to be relatively quick-witted in being able to respond. But I don't think you have to be that quick-witted. And generally speaking, if you need time, you just say to the judge, just give me a moment. And it's amazing, most judges don't mind allowing you to sit, and there's an awkward, uncomfortable silence for 2 minutes while you're trying to get your thoughts together. Anyway, the reason I mention my February is because it is one fantastic aspect of the bar is the flexibility. And I worked for 3 weeks of February in court, and I had 1 week where my wife was unable to help for half term. We've got kids. She works, I work. I work from home for the whole of half term. I took the kids to football camp, and there aren't that many professions, I think, where you can do that. I also technically don't work on a Friday. I work Monday to Thursday, and I work from home on a Friday. As the kids get older, I'm more flexible about that. But again, I'm not sure there are that many careers where you can do that. There is one major downside. I'm going away next week for a few days, and I don't know, most of you look very young and probably haven't worked, but there is the one fantastic thing when you first are employed by any employer is that first time you go on holiday. And you go on holiday and you sit on a beach, or you ski somewhere, or you're walking through a museum and you know that you're being paid to do it. And I'm afraid to say, when you go on holiday, when you're at the bar, you're not being paid to do it. So that's a bit tough. Having said that, again, flexibility is key. I never worked the last 2 weeks of July. The clerks aren't hugely fond of that, but that's when the school holidays start, and I don't go back to work until the school holidays end at the end of August. And again, holiday time is very flexible at the bar as well. I personally enjoy it, and I commend it as a profession generally. And personally, immigration for me, after a few false starts, has proved to be the one. So I hope that gives you some flavour and some interest, and I'll move you over to Beatrice.
My chamber's core practice areas are public law, police law and employment law, and I practice in all those three areas, but I'm going to talk to you today principally about public law. I'm also going to give you a short potted history, so forgive me if it's a little tedious, but we'll get through to the public law in a moment. I came to the bar after a short career in contemporary art, a very short career indeed. I first of all worked as a gallery girl in a contemporary art gallery in Mayfair. I was a gallery girl dressed in black in a pristine white cube in Mayfair. And I also worked for the contemporary art magazine Frieze. I'd never previously considered a career in law, but fun as it was, realised that the contemporary art world wasn't for me. And a friend of mine who's a barrister suggested that it might be something that I would be suited to. So I organised a week's mini pupillage, and I'd never sort of really known any barristers before that point, and realised quite rapidly that this was just fantastic. It didn't seem like a real job. And so fast forward through a law degree and bar school and time for pupillage applications, I was fairly sure that what I wanted to do was have a public law practice. And one of the reasons for that was that I'd really enjoyed studying administrative law. Now, I'm sure that you will know or be starting to find out that law in practice is not really the same as studying it. And for me, in my case, 2 days at a property law set made me understand that. But I'm pleased to say that my public law practice has nevertheless lived up to my expectations. I'd been attracted to it because I felt that the interaction between law and policy and politics was extremely absorbing, and that is something which continues in practice. As far as my choice of chambers was concerned, I knew that 5 Essex Court, my chambers, did the practice areas that I wanted to pursue. And as I say, it's a leading police set, and I realised that a lot of important human rights cases are cases which involve the police. So it dawned on me that having a police practice is one way to have a very interesting civil liberties, do some very exciting civil liberties work. But as well as the practice areas, I was attracted by the atmosphere in chambers. I expect that you will have done many pupillages, and you will all have realised that each set has its own sort of particular vibe, as it were. And something that I was, I suppose to be frank, taken aback by was how friendly and down-to-earth the members of chambers were. I didn't know many people at the bar at that time, and I suppose, if truth be told, was somewhat intimidated about trying to join this as I perceived it, slightly rarefied world. And I thought that the people at 5 Essex Court offered what would be a supportive environment. And whilst a career at the bar is absolutely wonderful and exciting, it's also at times undoubtedly very stressful. And so I think supportive colleagues are an extremely valuable asset. So I'm glad to say that's proved to be the case in my set. Now, public law is the area of law which governs the exercise of of power by public bodies. And as you appreciate, there are all sorts of different kinds of public authorities who take decisions every single day which affect the lives of thousands of people. So those public authorities would include government ministers, local authorities, the local education authority, for example, the prison service, coroners' courts, and the police, to name but a few. And because public law intersects with any kind of government activity and also has implications for corporations, for NGOs and others, it's apparent that actually what we call public law is in fact a very wide area that builds upon another substantive area of law, and you can choose whether you want your public law practice to be more sort of commercially based or more immigration based or more police based or whatever it might be. For example, a challenge by a badgers trust to DEFRA's policy on the culling of badgers is an example of a public law case, just as is a challenge by a company director to the issue of a search warrant by a magistrate's court, just as is a challenge by the civil servants trade union to the change in the pension policies by the Secretary of State. These are all very different sorts of public law cases. And in practice terms, the litigation will generally be conducted by way of judicial review. As a public lawyer, you can expect to spend lots of time in the admin court doing judicial review. My practice, in particular, is concerned with the judicial review of decisions by the police, of the prison service, of the immigration authorities, and of coroners. So, to give an example from my own practice, last week I was doing a judicial review in an immigration case in which the claimant was challenging the fact that the Identity and Passport Service had refused to issue him with a replacement passport. I was representing the defendant in this case. And in preparing for it, I had to look at the circumstances in which the royal prerogative is reviewable by the courts. And also, because the claimant had been born in what was then Pakistan but is now Bangladesh, I had to look at the statutory provisions which provide for entitlement to British citizenship of persons born in former colonies. So all of which was incredibly fascinating. And going back to what I said about being interested in administrative law at the academic stage, all of which reflected some of the interests that I found at the academic stage. Examples of other cases that I've been involved with include issues such as the circumstances in which a terminally ill life sentence prisoner can be released on compassionate grounds, decisions by the Independent Police Complaints Commission about whether a police force should investigate a complaint by the member of the public, security categorisations of prisoners, for example. These are a few of the sorts of areas that I work in. And what I find appealing about this work is that it concerns decisions taken or actions carried out within a public policy framework. Unlike quite a lot of private law matters, there will always be an important consideration about the general public context in which this particular dispute takes place. And so in order to work in this area of law, you need to understand that policy context, and you also need to understand the operational realities of the public authority that you are challenging or representing, which in my view is extremely interesting and an appealing aspect of it. One other attractive feature of the work is that judicial review is, of course, one important means by which public power is accountable. And it's, of course, important to acknowledge on the other side that by virtue of the nature of their functions, public authorities can be very vulnerable to unmeritorious challenges. So what's exciting, whether you're on the claimant side or the defendant side, is being part of this process of accountability. On the claimant side, this can be by challenging poor decisions and pushing for transparency. As Philip said, wanting to make a difference is not uncommon, and in a public law you can certainly do that on the part of your individual client by pushing public authorities who have made poor decisions. And on the defendant side, you can of course defend good decisions and there are plenty of good decisions, and explain why certain actions have been taken. But also it's an important role, if you're acting for a defendant, an important role that you have is an advisory role, which is to explain to a public authority how to your client the ways in which they can carry out their duties in a way that respects human rights, for example, and are lawful. Good lawyers are important to public authorities because they help public authorities act well, which in turn makes for a better quality of life within the community. So there is, as well as the intrinsic interest of the work, it's also, in my view, an attraction of this area of work that you do feel that you're contributing to a benefit for society as a whole. Now, as far as lifestyle implications are concerned, Philip referred to some questions that we were asked to speak about, and one of them was lifestyle implications. I would probably endorse what Philip has said about flexibility and about the fact that it's not. Well, certain types of public law will take place within a commercial environment, but it's not the same as a really high-pressure commercial environment. And that's not to say that there aren't responsibilities, that's not to say that there isn't pressure, but it's of a different nature than in a commercial context. One other thing I would say is that on the whole, because judicial review takes place in the High Court, there's perhaps less travel than in other areas of work. Certainly in my public law practice, I travel less than in my employment practice, where I expect to be going all over the country. I also have a daughter who's 2, so that it's quite nice for me when I know that I'm going to be in the admin court for a couple of weeks rather than in, I don't know, Exeter. Key skills and personal qualities. I think really, in common with all areas of law, you have to have a quick legal mind and an attention to detail and an ability to absorb huge amounts of policy data and so on. One thing I would say is that in court you're expected to have a good working knowledge of the procedures of the public authority that you're either challenging or representing. So it's very helpful to have an interest in, for example, the workings of the prison service, because you will be expected as the representative of either a prisoner or of the prison service to have a thorough understanding of what actually takes place in the prison. And I'll finish with what one high-profile police client said about what he wanted from his lawyers, which was that he wanted to be told how to do what he wanted to do within a lawful way, but more importantly, he really did want to know when he couldn't do what he wanted to do, and to be advised in no uncertain terms that was the case. So with that, I will finish and hand over to Justin.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon actually. My name is Justin Leslie and I'm a pupil at 42 Bedford Row. Now, 42 Bedford Row is a common law chambers that does a little bit of public law. And I'm just going to speak to you generally about public law and my interest in it and how you can develop a practice in public law. I didn't actually get the list of questions to answer that Philip and Beatrice had, so lesson number 1 for aspiring barristers is read your brief. But I think I'll more or less cover what has been covered by Philip and Beatrice. Now, just to briefly sort of describe how I came to public law, I was one of those students at uni who did sort of things like philosophy and politics and so on. And after about 3 years of sort of not really doing a great deal of work, it suddenly dawned on me and my parents that I did probably need to get some sort of job or do something else, to do another course. And the law conversion seemed like quite a good idea. So along I went and did the law conversion, and I actually found it pretty uninspiring. I mean, I don't know if anyone here does the GDL themselves, but it wasn't exactly what I had expected it to be. It was just a bit too overwhelming, and there wasn't much time to think about what we were doing until we started public law, and suddenly we were sort of addressing, but from a legal point of view, things which I'd been sort of skirting around during my degree, so sort of how government works, the nature of the constitution, and so on. And I thought, okay, hang on. I mean, maybe law isn't so bad after all. So I thought I'll stick with public law. I mean, I'll do what I have to with property law and tort and everything else, but I'll really focus on public law. And there was one moment in particular, actually, that I thought public law is great, and being a public law barrister would be fantastic, because about 2007 I was doing my conversion, and this case came out called Weil and Birmingham, which was quite a big House of Lords case on the scope of the Human Rights Act. And I was reading it. I didn't read cases in the other subjects, but in public law I was sort of reading this case. And at the bottom of the kind of Westlaw transcript thing that you get on the internet, it sort of said, "Oh, count the sort of barristers." And I thought, hang on, those are real people. And so I googled their names, and sort of up popped sort of faces of these real people who had been involved in this quite kind of landmark case. And I thought, that's quite cool, because they've been involved in this quite big case. And I thought, maybe 15, 20 years' time, I'd like to be that person. So just reading that case made me quite aware about how a relatively technical area of law can actually have a really big impact on kind of a large kind of section of society. And that's why law, and I think in particular public law, is so fantastic, is because it is this fantastic tool to sort of help normal people with their problems, and also stand up to the state at the same time. And I think that standing up to the state bit is actually often a sort of a key kind of driver behind a lot of public lawyers, and it'll be you guys sort of on the front line doing that, and it's going to be increasingly important as time goes on. So anyway, back to the GDL. Finished the GDL, thank goodness. I did a master's in public law, which was what the GDL could have been. If you have the wherewithal and the time and the patience to do something like that, I would heartily recommend it. Also recommend doing a master's before you get into practice, or before the BPTC and pupillage and so on, because it's really quite difficult, I think, to then take a year out once you've got yourself started. I then spent some time working for a little charity, public law charity called the Public Law Project, and then I worked in the public law team at the Law Commission. So there's a bit of a theme developing, and I've written on public law now and again, and I also do the occasional tweet on public law as well. So, which is not the most interesting Twitter feed, I have to say. So that's kind of my public law nerdyism for you. Perhaps the most useful thing I can talk about, though, is how you can develop a practice in public law at a chambers that doesn't necessarily itself specialise in public law that much. I mean, not every single chambers does full-on public law, but might do just a little bit now and again. There'll be nuggets of public law that come up in cases that they do. And I'm pleased to say that at a chambers like mine, quite a broad common law chambers, that in no way precludes you from developing a practice in a direction that you want to go in. And as I think Philip sort of mentioned, is one of the great things about being an independent, self-employed person, is that you can do the job that you want to do, and you can make the job what you want it to be. Now, it's not all kind of roses, though, and there are just a couple of reality checks before kind of I move on to some practical tidbits. First, that big case that I read when I was doing my GDL, those lawyers were, probably 20 years into their careers, and it's people who've been doing law for sort of 10, 20 years, who are really doing the heavy-hitting public law cases that kind of get the blood racing. So it would be a bit naive to apply to a set of chambers thinking that you're going to be kind of regularly in the Supreme Court, kind of eyeballing Lady Hale. That's probably not going to happen for a while. But building a practice takes time, and there's no real rush. I mean, 20 years is actually quite a long time. I mean, that's most of my life again. So there really is no rush. And actually, it's almost there's a high risk of you mucking up a case that's too big if you take it on too soon. Second reality check is that there are very few pure public law chambers. So Beatrice's chambers does quite a lot of employment work and personal injury work. Philip's chambers does quite a lot of property law work. And as a pupil, you would be expected to do at least some of that. So you'll need to think about other areas that you'd be happy doing as well. And furthermore, lots of public law chambers actually focus on a particular area, and with public law being so broad, you might end up focusing on housing or planning or immigration or extradition or whatever. Public law being so broad means that you need to kind of think about what you're going to be doing when you're applying to a particular set of chambers. In fact, doing more than just public law, I would say, from a common law set, is extremely important, because your main concern as a junior practitioner is getting as much experience as you can, cutting your teeth every single day in court if you can, and getting the skills that you can sort of develop in an employment law, sort of in an employment tribunal or a county court, will help you piece together all the skills you need to deploy in a JR. Now, if you're thinking, you're sort of sitting there thinking, hang on, this all sounds fine, but basically I really want to specialise in badger law in Wales, and running around county courts is going to be dreadful, because every time I get a brief and it's not on badger law, it's going to be really, really disappointing. Now, if that's the feeling you get, if the mere idea of doing any employment law terrifies you, then think, well, okay, I might like public law, but is being a public law barrister the thing that I want to be? Because necessarily you'll be doing areas beyond public law. So you want to feel the excitement when you kind of open that pink ribbon and look at your brief for the first time, not a kind of groan you're having to go to some horrible county court to do something that isn't badger law. And it's also extremely bad business sense from your own point of view to go to a set and say, hello, set, you do kind of employment, public law, police law, and whatever, like Beatrice's set, and say, I only want to do public law. I'm not going to do any of your police law stuff. I'm not going to do any of your employment law stuff. It doesn't, having all your eggs in that one basket will not help you build a successful practice over time. So, useful tips for this. I've got 5. 1, if you can, try and get yourself published. Now, I don't mean get yourself published in some august legal journal like Public Law. Get yourself published in something quite practical and rather than academic. So the New Law Journal or the Legal Action Group magazine are both excellent magazines that solicitors, the people, your eventual clients, will be reading. And if you can just get something small in there, that gets your name around. Offer to do lectures or contribute to conferences. My chambers often do conferences and lectures. And if you can just say, I'm a keen pupil, I'd like to help out, that gets your name around as well. Number 3 is NGOs. I mean, a big factor in public law work is the role of NGOs. And Philip and I have had involvement in an NGO called Medical Justice. And this has given me in particular like a real insight into how kind of strategic public law litigation works. And I mean, by strategic, I mean sexy litigation, basically. Number 4 is what I sort of alluded to before. If you can do, and if you're so inclined, I would encourage you to get onto something like Twitter, because I know it sounds kind of a bit woolly and rubbish, basically, but actually being on Twitter, you can engage in public law debates as they happen. Now, you may not have time, or just you can't really be bothered to do that, but I've actually found Twitter quite useful. In fact, tweeting about today a few weeks ago was the reason I'm talking to you now. So Twitter can actually have some quite interesting results. And number 5 is, I think obvious to any public law practitioner, is do pro bono work. I mean, pro bono work should be, I think, sort of part of the remit of all lawyers, but in particular public lawyers. The bottom line of all those 5 little tips is just trying to get yourself out there as much as you can. The good news is that your chambers will be supportive in your endeavours, because they have a vested interest in you doing well and staying at their chambers. So my experience is that your success is their success. So I wouldn't be perturbed by the idea that you're at a chambers that doesn't do as much public law as you might like. And often, actually, in cases that don't immediately appear to be public law cases, there'll be a little public law nugget. And in my chambers, we do quite a lot of family law work, and a public law point came up in a family law case that no one really knew the answer to, and it was on the Equality Act, and I'd just done a bit of work on that, kind of with a different hat on, and I said, oh, okay, the Equality Act, is it this and is it this? And this family lawyer said, oh, do you want to have a go drafting the grounds of appeal then? So I did, and did the skeleton as well, and lo and behold, we're in the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal judge was looking at my skeleton saying, well, I don't know about this and I don't know about that, but that was pretty exciting. So there is a lot more scope than you may think, but that's just because the bar is a really flexible and really accommodating place. So as long as you have determination, commitment and patience, you'll be able to get the kind of public law career you want. So good luck with that.